Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Zachary Bennett had always been proud of the life he'd built with Olivia. They lived in Boulder, Colorado, in a house with simple architecture but a cozy feel, surrounded by a quiet neighborhood and the constant sound of trees swaying in the wind. They'd been married for 9 years, and from the beginning, they'd learned how to maintain a rare balance between affection, respect, and routine. He worked as an environmental engineer at a local consulting firm that developed sustainable projects for regional businesses, while she worked as a nutritionist at a clinic specializing in women's health, highly rated by patients and colleagues alike. Their lives followed a predictable rhythm, yet one that felt comforting. Zachary was methodical and calm, the kind of man who always paid attention to small details, like remembering his wife's favorite ice cream flavor or noticing when she switched perfumes. Olivia, on the other hand, was lighter, more spontaneous, with an energy that seemed to fill the quiet spaces in the house. She often left sweet notes stuck to the bathroom mirror, sent messages in the middle of the day just to say she missed him, and sometimes prepared different dinners on Friday nights, even when they were both tired. On weekends, they loved walking along nearby trails or simply spending hours on the couch watching shows, sharing a blanket and knowing they didn't need anything more. They didn't have kids, by choice. Both were comfortable with the life they had and the space they'd created for each other. When arguments happened, they were resolved through calm conversations, without yelling or slammed doors. Among their friends, they were seen as a model couple, the kind who seemed to have discovered the secret formula for living together. At year-end parties, Zachary's family always commented on how lucky he was to have found Olivia, and he agreed. He felt that beside her, he'd found a peace that was hard to put into words. It was on a regular Wednesday morning, after breakfast, that Olivia mentioned she had run into Meredith Shaw, a college friend, while shopping at a bookstore downtown. She spoke with a sparkle in her eyes, like someone reconnecting with a good piece of the past. Meredith had been living in Boulder again for a few months now, after being away for a while, and seemed excited about reconnecting with old friends. Olivia said they'd talked for a long time, exchanged numbers, and promised to plan something in the coming days. Zachary smiled and encouraged her. He thought it was healthy for her to maintain friendships outside their usual couple circle. From then on, Olivia and Meredith's meetings became frequent. They started with coffee at a charming bakery near the university where they'd studied, then came Saturday lunches, quick visits to each other's homes, and even some evening walks in the park. Olivia always came back saying she felt re-energized, that it was good to reminisce about old stories and talk about things that didn't involve work or routine. Zachary listened carefully, asked questions, and liked seeing her excited. To him, there was no reason to worry. That friendship seemed like a harmless revival of a past chapter. Meredith even came over to their house a few times, always polite, cheerful, with an outgoing manner that contrasted with Zachary's more reserved nature. They chatted about trivial things, shared stories from college, laughed about memories that still felt alive. Zachary, though he didn't have much in common with her, remained courteous and respectful. He trusted Olivia completely and knew she valued honest relationships. It never crossed his mind that anything different could come from that reconnection. Time passed, and the frequency of their meetings increased. Olivia said she needed time to clear her head, that talking with Meredith was a way to step away from work demands and daily routine. Zachary understood and thought it was fair. He also enjoyed his own time alone, reading articles, working on personal projects, or just listening to music in the backyard. Their marriage worked like that, with space, trust, and constant affection. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, as they had coffee in the backyard, Olivia casually mentioned she had plans to go to the mall with Meredith the next day. She said she might take the chance to look at some new clothes, have ice cream, and catch up. Without hesitation, Zachary nodded and told her to enjoy herself. He smiled at the light excitement on his wife's face and went back to flipping through the magazine in his hands. Nothing about that moment seemed out of place. Nothing suggested it would be their last peaceful afternoon together. Sunday started like any other. Zachary woke up alone in bed, since Olivia had left earlier to meet Meredith at the mall, as she'd mentioned the night before. He spent the morning doing small household tasks, washing the car, tending to the plants in the yard, answering a few pending emails. The weather in Boulder was pleasant, and there was no rush for anything. Around 2 in the afternoon, while making coffee in the kitchen, he heard the familiar sound of a bank notification on his phone. He glanced at it without much interest, assuming it was just a routine transaction, but what he read made his stomach drop. The message confirmed an approved purchase on the credit card at a motel in the northern part of town, known for being discreet and easy to access for people who didn't want to be seen. The amount matched a short stay, something quick, impulsive. The purchase had been made in person, using the physical card, which ruled out any possibility of cloning or unauthorized online use. Zachary reread the notification 3 times, trying to find a plausible explanation. But nothing made sense. Olivia was supposed to be with Meredith at the mall, at least that's what he believed. Overcome by an uneasiness he couldn't control, he opened the bank app, confirmed the transaction, and located the exact address. Within minutes, he grabbed the car keys and left, not even sure what he'd say, if he'd say anything at all. He drove there with a tight chest, a racing heart, and a growing sense that something was deeply wrong. As he approached, he immediately recognized Olivia's car parked in front of one of the rooms. The car was turned off, windows half open, and no sign of Meredith anywhere nearby. Zachary pulled back, parked on a side street, and watched from a distance. About 10 minutes passed before the room door opened. Olivia stepped out first, fixing her hair, glancing around with a slight look of hurry on her face. Behind her came a man of average height, dark-haired, with a relaxed expression. They walked close together, quietly laughing, like people who had just stepped out of an intimate moment. The image was clear, direct, unmistakable. There was no doubt about what had happened inside. On impulse, Zachary got out of his car and walked toward them. Olivia saw him before the man did and stopped walking suddenly. Her face lost color. Her wide eyes showed shock, and for a few seconds she stood frozen, unsure what to say. The man, confused, just watched the scene unfold. Zachary stopped a few feet away and asked in a controlled but firm voice what exactly was going on. Olivia hesitated, took a step forward, and asked almost in a whisper how he knew she was there. The question sounded more like desperation than denial. He pulled his phone from his pocket, showed her the screen, and stated coldly that the purchase had been approved on her card, reminding her that all account notifications, including those from the card, went straight to his phone. The silence that followed was heavy. Olivia looked down, put a hand to her forehead, and slowly shook her head, as if only then realizing her mistake. In a low voice, she said she'd used the wrong card. She hadn't meant to use that one. It was a tiny detail, but it turned into definitive proof. Zachary then turned to the man and asked who he was. Olivia answered before he could speak. She said his name was Graham Cole, that they had studied together in college, and that they'd reconnected by chance through Meredith. She added that things had happened quickly, that she herself still didn't know how to explain it. Graham, uncomfortable, tried to say something, but Zachary raised his hand, asking for silence. Calmly, but with eyes burning with anger, he told the man to leave immediately, before the situation got out of hand. Graham didn't argue. He turned quietly and hurried away toward the parking lot. Olivia stayed frozen, unsure what to do. She tried to approach, started saying it wasn't what it looked like, that it was a mistake, that she'd gotten confused, that she'd been feeling lonely and overwhelmed, and that things had happened impulsively. Zachary listened in silence for a few seconds, but there was no empathy, no hesitation. The pain was clear on his face, but it was a cold pain, with no room for pleas. He took a deep breath, looked her straight in the eyes, and said there was nothing left to continue. That it made no sense to search for explanations, because no justification could change what he had seen with his own eyes. He turned and walked away, leaving Olivia standing alone in the middle of the parking lot, surrounded by the weight of a choice she couldn't even explain to herself. Zachary drove back home in complete silence. Hands firmly on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road, but his mind caught in a whirlwind of disconnected thoughts. The image of Olivia leaving that room with Graham kept repeating like an endless loop. He tried to process everything, but it felt like there wasn't time for that. He needed to act, needed to get out, needed to preserve the little dignity he still felt he had. When he got home, he went straight to the bedroom. He glanced around at the objects as if seeing a scene about to become unrecognizable. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a medium-sized suitcase from the closet, started folding clothes, separated documents, laptop, personal items, everything in a practical, objective way. There was no anger in his actions, just a cold practicality, like someone who knows that what once felt familiar is no longer home. He went downstairs, grabbed the car keys, and left a note on the kitchen table. It didn't explain anything. It just said he needed time and that he didn't know when he'd return. He walked out of the house without looking back. He checked into a small hotel downtown, one of those discreet places meant for traveling professionals. He asked for a room in the back, away from the noise, and spent the first night there in absolute silence. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't answer calls, didn't reply to messages. He lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to understand how someone could betray so much trust without leaving any trace before the final mistake. He felt empty, as if something inside him had been suddenly torn away. The next morning, he woke up early and started looking for rental homes. He didn't want to return to the home where he'd been betrayed. He needed a new space, even if temporary. He visited a few simple properties, all small and far from the neighborhood where he'd lived with Olivia. He wanted distance, anonymity, walls that held no shared memories. On the third day, he found a modest but well-lit single-story house with a small front garden. The owner seemed understanding, and the contract was signed as quickly as possible. For days after the incident, Zachary contacted his lawyer. He explained the situation directly, without hesitation, and asked that divorce proceedings begin as soon as possible. He wanted everything handled legally and fairly, but without leaving room for reconciliation or uncertainty. He also requested an appraisal of the house so assets could be divided equitably. He said Olivia could stay there until the property sold, but afterward each would take their share. The lawyer understood the urgency and started the process immediately. During those days, Olivia tried to contact him many times. She sent long messages, called in the middle of the night, wrote emails asking to talk. But Zachary didn't respond to any of them. Not out of revenge, but because he knew no conversation would matter in light of what he'd seen. Trust had been shattered beyond repair, and anything she said would just sound like noise disconnected from reality. He chose silence as protection. On the sixth day, while organizing some documents at his new place, he received a social media message notification. It was from Graham. Seeing his name flashing on the screen made Zachary's blood run cold for a second. He opened the message. It was short, almost ashamed. Graham said he didn't expect forgiveness, but he needed to apologize. He admitted what he'd done was unforgivable, that he had no excuses, and that he deeply regretted crossing that line. He ended by saying he just wanted Zachary to know that. Zachary took a deep breath. He stared at the screen for a few seconds, then typed a quick, direct reply. He said forgiveness wasn't something Graham had the right to ask for. He said Graham shouldn't have sent that message at all, and that from that moment on, the least he expected was never to hear from him again. He ended with a single sentence, "Make sure you never cross my path again." He sent the reply, blocked the contact, and set the phone down on the table, like someone closing a door that would never open again. At that moment, Zachary didn't feel relief or satisfaction. He only felt the weight of reality, and the certainty that his life was now on a completely different path. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he already understood that yesterday, definitively, was gone. The passing days brought an uncomfortable silence to every side of the story. Zachary was now settled in his new home, still adjusting to the empty space, the lack of familiar references, and the constant sound of his own breathing filling the rooms. Boxes were still stacked in the living room, pictures leaning against walls with no clear destination, but none of it bothered him. It was temporary chaos, but honest, very different from the false order that had existed in the house he shared with Olivia. One morning, while eating at a cafe near work, he saw Meredith Shaw walk in. She recognized him immediately and, hesitantly, approached his table. Zachary looked up from his newspaper and met her gaze with neutrality. Meredith asked if she could sit, and he nodded slightly. They sat in silence for a few seconds until she began speaking, visibly nervous, like someone carrying a burden that wasn't theirs but felt compelled to clarify. She said she only found out about what happened between Olivia and Graham 2 days after it occurred, when Olivia called her crying to confess. She said she was shocked, had no idea the two had reconnected outside their friendship, let alone that they'd gotten involved. She emphasized that her friendship with Olivia had always been genuine, based on college memories, and that she never meant to serve as a bridge for a romantic reunion or any kind of connection with Graham. Zachary listened in silence, taking small sips of his now cool coffee. He didn't interrupt or argue, just listened. Meredith spoke about how she also felt betrayed, used as an excuse, as an alibi, by someone she trusted. She said she wasn't complicit in anything and that if she'd seen any sign, she would have warned him or taken action. Her voice trembled at times, but her gaze remained steady. She was there because she needed to clear her name of something that wasn't hers to carry, because she felt dragged into a story she never wanted to be part of. When Meredith finished, Zachary stayed silent for a few more seconds, then nodded and thanked her for the conversation. He said he believed her, that he understood she wasn't to blame, but that it still hurt all the same. Meredith respected his boundaries. She stood up with a sigh and wished him strength for what lay ahead. He only replied with a nearly whispered, "Thank you," and she walked away without looking back. The conversation had been necessary, but it didn't fix what was already broken. Meanwhile, Olivia remained in the couple's old house, now empty, silent, filled with memories that crushed her every day. She moved through the rooms like a stranger, feeling that everything around her belonged to a life she had destroyed with her own hands. In the first days, she kept trying messages and calls, but Zachary's silence was enough to stop her. As weeks passed, she realized there was no room for reconciliation. More than that, she began to grasp the true extent of what she had lost. People around her also started pulling away. Some friends stopped replying, others kept their conversations cold. Her family, while not judging her directly, couldn't hide their disappointment. Her father, a traditional man with a sharp tongue, said outright he didn't understand her choices. Her mother tried to comfort her, but always with a tired look, as if she didn't know how to help anymore. Neighbors began avoiding her, and Olivia started leaving the house less and less, afraid of stares, whispers, and the growing shame that piled up like dust in the corners of the rooms. It was in this suffocating environment that she began considering something she'd never thought possible. Maybe the best thing was to leave. There was no reason left to stay in Boulder. The city had become a minefield of memories, judgments, and losses. 1 month after everything happened, Olivia gathered her clothes, some old photos, and personal items, packed them into boxes and suitcases, and decided to go. She didn't tell anyone where she was headed, only left a message for her parents saying she needed to start over far from everything. In the quiet of a gray morning, she got in her car and drove away from the city where, for so many years, she had believed she was safe. But safety wasn't something you could regain after a wrong choice. It was something that, once broken, rarely existed again. The single-story house Zachary rented was in a residential neighborhood farther from downtown, surrounded by quiet streets and well-kept gardens. It wasn't big or modern, but it had something he valued more than any comfort: silence. The first days were strange. Used to Olivia's constant presence, the sound of her voice in the hallways, the clinking of silverware in the kitchen, their evening talks on the couch, he now walked through the rooms in total silence. But over time, that silence stopped feeling empty and started feeling like peace. Zachary began building a new routine, adjusted to the smaller space and the absence that once filled his life. He came home from work in the late afternoon, played soft music, prepared meals calmly, and dedicated time to his side projects in sustainability, something he'd always dreamed of turning into his own business. Slowly, the place gained personality. A new rug in the living room, books stacked beside the bed, a small picture on the kitchen wall with a quote he liked. It was a slow process, but an authentic one. During this time, the divorce process moved forward with the efficiency he expected. His lawyer handled the legal steps, and Olivia, without contesting anything, signed the documents as they arrived. Neither tried to reverse the decision. The divorce proceeded like a quiet river, with no turns, no obstacles, just following its natural course after the break. With Olivia's final departure from the city, the house that had once been their shared home stood empty and was put up for sale. It took a few months before a buyer appeared, but that didn't bother Zachary. He knew some things needed their own time to end. 7 months after discovering the betrayal, the sale of the house was finally completed. The proceeds were split fairly, as agreed. With his share, Zachary didn't hesitate. He rented a small office space downtown and opened his own environmental consulting studio. It was a simple place, with shared desks, plants by the windows, and a whiteboard full of ideas. There, he began developing projects for small businesses wanting to adopt more sustainable practices. He worked with dedication, and the response was better than expected. For the first time in years, he felt he was building something entirely his own, born from his own choices. While Zachary rebuilt his life, Graham made very different decisions. After his ignored message and the harsh reply he received, he realized any attempt at redemption was pointless. He started avoiding places he used to go, cut ties with mutual acquaintances, and soon moved to another city. He went to live with a cousin in a more remote area, found a simple job, and disappeared from social media. He didn't keep in touch with Olivia or try to find out how she was. It seemed he had finally understood, even if too late, that some choices don't allow a return. As for Olivia, her whereabouts became a mystery to nearly everyone. Since the day she left Boulder, she never visited her family again, gave few details about her new life, and limited her contact to occasional messages with her parents. No one knew exactly where she was, only that she'd temporarily settled in another city and avoided any exposure. She lived a quiet life, marked by silent regrets and a constant attempt at a fresh start that always seemed to stall. The emptiness left by her impulsive decision ran deeper than she imagined, and time, though necessary, still didn't seem enough to heal. Zachary, on the other hand, continued his life with calm. He still didn't talk much about what had happened, nor did he try to explain to others why he'd changed. He just lived one day at a time. His new house already felt like a home, and the studio was beginning to gain recognition. Sometimes, he still remembered what was lost, but without pain, just with the awareness that certain truths, once revealed, change everything forever. And that, no matter how much the past hurts, the future can be rebuilt, as long as you're willing to start over. And he was. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.